Hey you're finally back. Or maybe this is your first time watching. Either way, welcome on in, and here's what happened previously in the series. Our protagonist, Les, had given up on his previous life, and he wandered into the desert to escape society. He had lost all sense of purpose or guidance since his family had been taken from him, but the young man had a desire to learn and grow. Unsure of where to start, he chose a humble spot in the desert to lay his head. And that is where he began planting the seeds for a better future. Nature had tested his resolve time and again, and more than once he was nearly defeated. Yet Les remained steadfast in his belief that one day things would get better. One day he would have the normal life that he always dreamed of. His foes took the shape of many forms: animals, raiders, weather, starvation. But he realized over time that the greatest adversary of all was himself. He found escape through his insatiable rage and felt that he was beginning to descend down a shadowy path of fear and hatred. But all of that had changed when a woman named Steele crash-landed into his life. Rescuing her evoked emotions that he had thought he had lost forever. Through her, he found his compassionate side once again, and before long, their friendship blossomed into something more: love. After finding a Kodak on a dead raider, Les spoke with the Fallen Empire and had agreed to let them test a weather weapon in their region. The weapon brought forth rainy thunderstorms, which flooded into the dried lake bed. Steele and Les got engaged, and they made a new friend, Vernon, a large man whose skills were a great addition to their settlements. With a bright future ahead of him, Les presses forward on his journey to revitalize the region, and bringing an even brighter future to the less fortunate. After the proposal, Les set up the telescope, and both him and Steele stared into it for hours. They looked up at the stars, peeking through the gaps in the storm clouds whenever possible. The following afternoon, they were raided by the Squids of Cash. It was Panna, the Lonely, finally arriving to make good on her threat. She was a great shot, and she carried a lever-action rifle. She approached from the north, from behind the cover of the cacti field. Vernon was the first to spot her. He charged at the woman with his sword, but she eventually landed a shot on the man, and he retreated back inside. Seeing her new companion in trouble, Steele took cover behind another cacti and fired upon the woman with her revolver, but Panna proved to be an even deadlier shot. Steele got hit in the torso, and she too ran for the safety of the cabin, and was luckily able to elude the attacker's follow-up shots. Fortunately, the woman didn't pursue her wounded victims. Instead, she waited outside, ready to kill her true target, the man who greatly insulted her and her mother. And her wish came true nearly an hour later when Les returned home, whistling some sort of pleasant tune. He was shocked to find his fiancée bleeding on the ground, with a bloodied Vernon tending to her wound. He informed Les about their attacker and warned him that she was a dangerous shot. Seeing his future wife and his new companion in such a state tapped into that ferocious side of him once more. But this time, Les was able to cage that demon within and funnel that rage-filled energy into a heightened state of focus. He calmly walked out the door and studied the northern horizon until he spotted his target. Steele protested as Les was leaving, and she shoved Vernon away just as he finished stitching up her torso. The man pleaded with her to rest as she rushed for the door, but she was having none of it. Les continued to move in a calm, meditative-like state, his focus never breaking from Panna. He weaved himself methodically around the cacti, like a viper preparing to ambush its prey. The raider could only catch glimpses of him before he would vanish back behind cover. Many tense heartbeats passed by, each time she was growing increasingly nervous. Mere seconds later, the man was upon her, as if he had just materialized from the nearest cactus. She was only able to fire one shot, just one, but unfortunately for her, that was the only chance she would get against this foe. Les charged her with a flurry of blows, but the raider's strong plate armor shielded her from the brunt of the damage. A small struggle then ensued, with Panna trying to use her rifle as an improvised club. As the struggle was nearing its end, Les heard a shot from behind, and a bullet drove through the armor and into the woman's side. Steele was there, revolver in hand, her face locked in a grimace of pain and anger. Panna collapsed to the ground, and the couple just stared at one another, trying to gauge how the other was feeling. But before they could share a word, another raider entered the area, Denis the Cautious. Steele spotted them first and shouted a warning to the group, she quickly exchanged her revolver for Panna's lever-action rifle. Vernon was quick to follow suit, and he scooped up the revolver. With some new weapons in hand, the group went on the offensive. Steele provided Les with cover fire, while he quickly crossed the open ground with Vernon close behind. The trio flanked their attacker, and within minutes, the raider was dead. Once again, Les and Steele exchanged a concerned look. The rifle in Steele's hands was clearly shaking, and without saying a word, Les walked over and wrapped her in a hug and reminded her that everything was okay. He repeated the words back to her that he said to himself the first time that he took a life, but he knew, of course, that it didn't make it any easier. Only time and love really would. As the winter weather pressed on, their plants died off in rapid succession, but the campfire inside kept them warm. Steele's gunshot wound became infected, and Les treated her as best he could. The weather was cold and rainy, but the life-giving waters continued to pool and brought in new plant life throughout the region. The following morning, Steele's infection grew extreme, and Les, overwhelmed with concern, never left her side. Vernon did the best he could and mended her whenever possible, and thankfully, his medical prowess paid off and helped her pull through the extreme infection. Man, that was a close one. With Steele on the mend, Les thought he could relax a bit. Another transport pod crashed down, this time right next to their home. A woman named Yumiko Hensley from the Purple Basin Bandits. She was bleeding from a fatal gunshot wound to the neck and had only 4 hours to live. They decided that they would try to save her. Steele suggested that they build a holding cell and sketched out a rough blueprint. The trio rushed into action and constructed a simple room. Vernon hauled some of the supplies. Then he broke off and began patching up the woman's wounds. His main focus was on stopping the bleeding in her neck. Their timing was perfectly in sync, and by the time they finished building the holding cell, Vernon had finished healing Hensley. Perhaps too well, as she woke up and started crawling aggressively towards him. They searched the woman and found an ID badge. On the back of it was a list of her skills. It turned out that she was an accomplished chef and a fantastic artist. Together, the colonists would try to convince her to abandon her way of life, let go of the past. They would show her that there was a greater purpose here in the desert. It would take some time, no doubt, but they had plenty of that. Besides, Hensley had a nasty go juice addiction to kick, and it was better that she was imprisoned when she went through that. And a coyote tried hunting their iguana, Imp, for food. Seeing one of their own in danger, they rallied to the reptile's defense and dropped the coyote. But Vernon had a soft spot for the dog, and he worked valiantly to save it. They received an extortion message from a faction called Osheti, but Les refused to negotiate with terrorists. A group of Yatakan from Osheti attacked from the south. It was a lady named Beatit Honan. It took her a long time to reach the settlement, and when she did, she was destroyed immediately. Instead of burying her, Vernon suggested that they leave the body out for a few days for the coyote to eat. That's a great idea. Eventually, the group finished their research on basic furniture and began research on terraforming, another major key that would be used to revitalize the region. On the 6th of December, Les received an unexpected call on his Kodak. His friends Urka and Purple were calling in from their new settlement. Luckily, Purple's parents were still alive, and they, along with a few other people, had started a new colony not far from their old one. Now they were back on their feet, and they wanted to give them a proper thank you. And after getting the coordinates, they sent over a masterwork wooden meditation throne. That's a very generous gift. On the 8th of December, the coyote had self-tamed. It must have been won over by Vernon's kindness, and in honor of the event, we named her Luna Furiosa, because it just sounds really cool. And the good luck didn't stop there. A cluster of cargo pods fell from the sky. Fine grilled food. It was a special type of food that granted a nice mood boost and reduced hunger, but it lost its effectiveness if it didn't stay frozen. Unfortunately, that would be quite a problem for us. The hours passed by, collecting slowly into days, similar to how the droplets of rain gathered together into larger pools of water. The arrival of each sunrise brought with it something different. Sometimes it gave our friends new ideas, such as planting rye, and funny jokes. Other times, it brought them interesting creatures, like camels and ducks. Wait, ducks? We now have 9 ducks. They researched and worked and played. There were times of labor and times for rest, times for anger and times for love. But nothing great could happen without making the necessary sacrifices along the way. And as such, on day 52, the ducks needed to be reevaluated. Sure, they were good at producing eggs and giving us animal training practice, but the little monsters were eating us dry. Food was terribly low. Actually, it was non-existent. Some tough choices needed to be made. We slaughtered the 2 oldest male ducks. That left us with 2 others, plenty enough to repopulate with. We also hunted down the oldest camel. We didn't have any food to tame them anyway. Les hated the idea of killing these animals, but he understood that their bad food planning had led them here, and adjustments would need to be made going forward. Eventually, the forest weather had ended, and things had finally calmed in the desert again. The lake bed, once barren, was now full of water, and the nearby land was showing signs of life. Time continued to pass, and so did our struggle for food. The group organized and made plans on how they would prevent this going forward, and they did so mainly by consulting the prisoner, Hensley. Vernon had been picking her mind about all the things she knew about cooking, and she knew a great deal about food preservation as well. Maybe in time she would help them even more, but right now she was battling some severe withdrawal demons. Unfortunately, they had to hunt another camel throughout the revitalized lake, and they had to let the ducks nearly starve, only feeding the ones who most desperately needed food. Though there were still times when their spirits were lifted, such as when they took the time to admire the anima tree, or when a random migration of boom bats came through the area. Just look at how cute the little things are. They learned from their mistakes and made new discoveries. They often looked ahead toward their future, but every now and then, one of them looked up at their past. Eventually, things fell into a peaceful rhythm. Then, on the 6th of April-May, nearly 1 full year since Les had started his journey, he and Steele had gotten married. Vernon oversaw the event. He said some kind words about loving each other, and he had them exchange lifelong vows. During the celebration, they wandered around outside and playfully joked about breakfast and fighting hawks. A few days later, the group had finally convinced Hensley to join them, bringing the less fortunates up to 4. She informed them that she wanted to change her name. She would like to be called by her last name, Yumiko, going forward, as a way to fully signify her change. A Goronlin pod had sprouted, symbolizing just how far the region had recovered. Les brought the pod back home, and Vernon explained that it would grow into a Goronlin tree, and that it would create dryads, little nature spirits that could help heal and regrow the land. To Les, it became obvious that this seed was the final key to the revitalization project. These creatures can take up mending the land and rebuilding it, even without them needing to be present. Now he would only need to find a place to plant it. But where? It would seem that love is in the air. Vernon, the smooth talker that he is, flirted with Yumiko by subtly complimenting her emotional stability. And she found that to be very romantic. Now they're lovers. This is great. On day 66, they finished research on terraforming, and the group went to work right away, planning out how they would transform the surrounding land. Les took time to find a proper place for the Goronlin tree, and he planted it down in the sand just south of the settlement. As he did so, he could feel the seedling calling out to him, and he saw a resting spirit within the tiny plant. He couldn't hear it, but he could feel it speaking to him, somehow communicating with him from a deeper emotional level. Without understanding exactly why, he began pruning the tree. He closed his eyes and allowed the emotional guidance to take control. He saw the spirits of several different dryads circling around him, each with their own unique features and abilities. He felt a bond beginning to build with one of them, one which seemed most adept at helping bring life back to the desert. A surge of Druidic energy rushed into his body and washed back out into the tree. The surge of energy was both calming and invigorating, all at once, and when he opened his eyes, the pruning had been completed. He knew that he would need to come back and trim the tree again at least a few more times, but this was the start of a special connection. After some downtime, Steele had planned another expansion for their settlement and began building it just a few spaces north. For a time, things fell into a pattern of excitement and boredom. Some days they were attacked by bandits, and other days they were working and relaxing. All the while, everyone worked towards both their collective and personal goals. Steele continued to express her creativity by building a barn. Yumiko experimented with new recipes. Vernon continued to research new ways on how to improve the colony. And Les grew to level 14 in plants, officially making him a master planter. Unlike other people, he found the practice of farming to be almost meditative. Every day, he would tend to the crops and whisper words of positivity to each one he looked over. He felt a oneness with them, and felt as they grew, so did he. He loved seeing something so insignificant as a seed grow into a hardy, life-giving plant. On day 72, the hay was finally ready to be harvested. Not only did it make for good animal feed, but it also gave Steele extra material to build with. She found a purpose for it right away and used it as flooring for the small barn. The straw would help keep the filth to a minimum, which was helpful with so many animals. The colonists found life together pleasant. It was an interesting mix of youth and experience. They learned a lot from each other and enjoyed spending time together, though at times sharing a dorm got a bit awkward. Life continued to improve throughout the region as well. Plants were becoming more abundant, as were the animals. And though it was no longer raining, the natural reservoir of water Les found beneath the lake seemed to feed it enough to maintain the water levels, despite natural evaporation. All of this growth, all of these thoughts about life, made Steele a bit nervous, and she found herself peering into the telescope more frequently than usual. Over a week ago, she had finally spotted the crab-shaped constellation known as Kingler, and she knew that her home ship was approximately in that direction. But no matter how hard she stared up into the sky, she never saw her ship. For over half a year, she had been gone. So much has changed since that time. She was no longer some little girl on a ship. She was a woman of the desert. She had gained many skills and had fought and killed. But most of all, she had fallen in love and had married a wonderful man. She smiled to herself when she thought of her new last name. Steele shook her head. If things were so right, then why was she now yearning for her old life? Her parents, her friends? That question was weighing heavily on her mind. She felt that nervous little feeling again, the butterflies that raced throughout her stomach. A strange balance between giddiness and nausea. She was sick, she knew that. She must have caught a parasite or something, because every morning for the past few days she had been throwing up. Thankfully, Les seemed to elude whatever bug she had. He was great at avoiding danger after all, but she didn't want to tell him. She knew he would worry like crazy. He would probably never leave her side again. It would go away on its own, she thought to herself. She peered once again into the telescope, staring intently at the Kingler constellation, and for no reason at all, sadness had washed over her. After nearly another full day of trimming, Les felt his connection with the Goronlin tree grow significantly. And that night, while everyone was resting, a dryad cocoon formed nearby. As a thank you for taking her in, Yumiko decided to throw a desert party. There wasn't much in the way of food or entertainment, but it was a nice break from their daily routine. They discussed many topics, and her and Steele came up with a great idea. They wanted to make the settlement feel more homely. So Yumiko helped design some furniture, and Steele crafted a table and chairs. On day 76, the group began their long-awaited terraforming project. They would slowly begin changing over the area nearest to them, and after that, the plan was to continue expanding out in every direction, though they would purposely leave some spots as desert terrain, as to not destroy the habitat of the few creatures that called this place home. The ducks laid a ton of eggs in the boxes that Steele had made for them, so now there would soon be a lot of ducks, like a duck ton of ducks. Get it? A duck ton? Not all the animals were doing well. Luna Furiosa had been acting more feral as of late. Despite self-taming, it would seem that even Vernon, with his prowess for creatures, doesn't have enough pet skill to keep her domesticated. He warned the group to keep a close eye on her, in case she began to turn. Poor Luna, she sounds like some kind of zombie or something like that. Speaking of zombies, the next day a group of shambling corpses wandered right next to our house. They were being led by some massive skeletal gore hulk, Who knows why there's a group of fiends wandering about the desert, but this major threat needed to be dealt with. As they had practiced many times before, the group moved in unison and focused their fire on the nearest target, while Les stayed crouched in front of them, ready to strike if any of the monsters got too close. The first shambler took a lot of damage before going down, but luckily, it didn't draw the attention of the others. They targeted the Gore Hulk next. Even from this distance, its enormous girth and pungent smell made them hesitate. Steele took the first shot with her lever-action rifle. For several minutes, they fired into the relentless abomination until it collapsed into a pile of bones. The death of their leader seemed to spur on the other monsters. The fight got a bit messy, but thanks to their combined effort, they eliminated the monsters in short time. Les got scratched on his right foot and leg, and the others all looked at him nervously. Then, they reflexively looked back at Vernon, the most medically trained in the group. Vernon bent down and examined his leg. After some time, he said,
"We need to take the leg, Les. I'm sorry."
"Wait, what?" he began to protest. Steele and Yumiko both yelped.
"No, just messing with you. Don't worry, it's not contagious."
They all shared a laugh, and the fighting made them hungry, except for Les. Life continued to enter the region in many ways. The duck eggs had hatched, and now many, many ducklings were running around. The group was also hard at work, replacing poor soil with fresh, rich soil that would help plants grow faster. Steele, however, was still distracted from all of it. That sick, fluttery feeling in her stomach had worsened by the day, and today, she couldn't even hide it. She winced while playing a game of hoopstone with Vernon, and the man asked her what was wrong. She tried to brush it off as some type of food poisoning, but the wise man was having none of that.
"Stand up straight,"
he said to her, in a tone that a father would use on his sick child. Steele rolled her eyes, and she did what she was instructed. Vernon circled her like a shark, his hand stroking his neatly trimmed mustache. She insisted that she felt fine, but his eyes never left her body. After an uncomfortable minute had passed, he broke his silence with one of his rather long sounds. If Vernon had a tagline, that would be it. He asked her how long she had felt like this, and she informed him that it had been a few weeks.
"Hey, Meek,"
he shouted out playfully, asking Yumiko to join them. The woman smiled and asked what was going on.
"Stand here, if you would, and look at our girl Steele from this angle."
Yumiko said that she saw a brilliant young woman, and had laughed it off at first, but then Vernon whispered something into her ear, and her observation grew more intense. She walked up to Steele, much closer than Vernon, and asked if she can touch her abdomen. Steele was growing more uncomfortable by the second, but she trusted Yumiko a great deal, and she nodded in agreement. Yumiko gently felt around her torso, and groped around the rest of her upper body, not in a perverse way, but more in a way that a mother would inspect her child for a mysterious injury. She looked over to Vernon and said, "Well, I'm not a doctor, but I know a mom when I see one." Steele's jaw dropped so low that she half expected sand to get into it.
"My thoughts exactly,"
said Vernon with a wide grin. "No, it can't be," Steele started, her tears pouring out faster than the rains that filled the lake. Panic began to creep into her voice. "What will I tell Les? What if he's not ready? What if I'm not ready?" Yumiko teared up too, and she wrapped Steele in a tight hug, but not too tight. She assured the young woman that everything would be all right, and that they would be there to help her get through this together.
"Oh, come here,"
said Vernon, wrapping his big arms around both of them. Just then, Les rounded the corner, rice in hand, and he froze immediately. A confused sound escaped his lips, and all three peered over to him at once, each with tears in their eyes.
"Oh, there he is,"
Vernon replied with a wave of his giant hand to beckon the young man forward. He walked awkwardly into their little huddle, and he felt Yumiko shove his lower back in, forcing him right up against Steele. Les looked into his wife's watery eyes, and though he had no context as to what was happening, he felt tears creeping into his own. Steele tried to speak. She wanted to explain what had happened, and all the emotions she was feeling, how happy she was, but the only word she could manage to say was his name. She repeated it again, and her voice cracked, and only sobs followed. I love you," Les blurted out. He didn't know what else to say, so he went with what he felt most in his heart. Steele's crying increased tenfold when he said that, and she sunk her bobbing head into his chest. Les looked at Vernon and Yumiko for any hint as to what was going on, but the couple just smiled and nodded at him. Seeing Vernon with tears in his eyes hit him hard. The lore keeper had begun to feel like a father to him. He was a mountain of a man whose body aged like stone. Les couldn't imagine what might have made his tough exterior crack. After a few heartbeats, Steele looked up into her husband's eyes and smiled. "Say it again," she demanded. "Say what?" Les asked, feigning ignorance. Steele playfully punched him in his chest. "You know what." Les smiled just as wide as her, and he confessed his love for her again, and then again, and one additional time, just for good measure. Steele laughed. Then she looked deep into his eyes and said, "Les, we're having a baby." "A baby?" he gasped, feeling like he was just struck in the solar plexus by a master carder. Steele's face tightened, and she kept nodding, never breaking their eye contact. We're having a baby," Les roared happily, and now his face was looking a lot like hers. They shared a long kiss, and he lifted her in the air, and she laughingly reminded him to be careful.
"Aw, look at these kids,"
Vernon shouted cheerfully at Yumiko. The couples all shared a big family hug then.
"This means we're gonna be grandparents then."
They all laughed and cried and celebrated together. It wasn't the normal life Les had imagined before, but it was a better one than he could ever have dreamed of. I want to give a big shout out to Geralt's Pod Novigrad U5508. I hope I said that right. He was the one that spotted the hidden word in the last episode. So great job on finding that, Geralt. There's a new hidden object in this video as well, but I'll be announcing that in the coming days, so keep an eye on the community posts and the Discord. There's plenty more videos on the way, and a lot of Rimworld stories as well, so be sure to stay tuned. And until next time, take care, my friends.